She turned the box over in her hands like she was trying to guess its weight, not its meaning. "This?" she said finally, her lips curling as if the word itself tasted bad. She lifted the lid halfway, just enough to let the light hit the bracelet inside. "You actually thought I'd want this?" The gold caught the afternoon sun through the kitchen window. I'd chosen it for the way it would do that, for the way it might warm her skin when she wore it. Each stone had been set in a pattern she once traced on my palm on a rainy Sunday morning when we'd talked about a life we couldn't yet afford. I'd been saving for months, cutting corners she never noticed. Cancelled lunches, old suits worn a little longer. Quiet, deliberate sacrifices for a surprise I thought would remind her we still had us. Her eyes met mine. They weren't curious or moved. They were sharp, cold, measuring. "God," she said, closing the lid with a click, "you really don't get it. You're predictable, safe, boring." The last word didn't come out with heat. It was worse than that. It came out like a diagnosis. Something final. She set the box down on the table between us, not pushed toward me, not kept for herself. Just left there, abandoned like a drink she didn't order. "I'm leaving," she said, her tone flat, almost rehearsed. "There's someone else." She let the pause linger just long enough for me to feel the space open between us. He's younger, he actually lives, and I'm tired of pretending I don't want more. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator. No ringing in my ears, no flare of anger, just the strange quiet of something inevitable finally stepping into the room. I thought I should feel panic, or grief, or at least the desperate scramble to change her mind. But what I felt, standing there with her words still settling in the air, was an almost surgical clarity. I sat down, pulling the box toward me. My fingers brushed the lid, but didn't open it. "You're sure?" I said, more statement than question. She crossed her arms. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I've been done for a long time." I nodded slowly, letting her think she'd stripped me bare. Inside, something else was moving, steady, deliberate, the same way I'd been moving for months. "You know," I said, "it's funny. You're not just walking away from me." Her brows pulled together, just a flicker. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned back in my chair. "That bracelet? It wasn't just a gift. It was a key. The last piece of paperwork for the house I bought. A house I was going to put in your name. You were holding the deed when you opened that box." The color drained from her face faster than I'd expected. "You're lying," she said, but there was no weight behind it. I didn't smile. "Walk away if you want, but understand exactly what you're leaving on the table." She stared at me for a long second, her mouth opening and closing before she found her footing. "You think this changes anything?" "I think it already has," I said, standing and picking up the box. The gold inside caught the light again, brighter now, almost mocking. "And I think you just made your choice a lot simpler for both of us." I walked past her, the box in my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull to turn back. Her voice followed me down the hall, sharper now, tinged with something that sounded a lot like fear. But I didn't answer. I didn't go back into the kitchen. I took the box upstairs, set it on the dresser, and opened the closet. My suitcase was already there, not because I'd been planning to leave, but because for months I'd been thinking about what I'd take if I ever did. Shirts folded tight, jeans, a few things that still felt like mine. I packed without rushing, listening to the muffled rhythm of her footsteps below, the sharp sound of a cupboard closing too hard. When I came back down, she was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Her expression was different now, not triumph, not anger. Something more cautious. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just going to walk out?" I set the suitcase by the door. "You said you were done. I'm just making it official." Her gaze darted to the bracelet box still in my hand. "You can't just—" "Yes," I said, cutting her off. "I can, and I am." She pushed off the counter, taking a step toward me. "You're being dramatic. We can talk about this." "We've been talking," I said, "for years. And while I was trying to fix things, you were finding someone else to make you feel alive. So no, we're done talking." The words landed harder than I expected, on both of us. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I pulled my keys from the hook by the door. "You'll get the paperwork from my lawyer, soon." Her laugh was short and humorless. "You think this makes you look strong? You look pathetic." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'm done looking at you like you're the answer to my life." I stepped outside before she could answer. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt final. The air was cooler than I'd expected, the street quiet except for the faint rush of traffic 2 blocks away. My car was parked at the curb, but I didn't get in. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and called Mike. "Need a couch?" he said as soon as he heard my voice. "Something like that," I replied. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in his living room, the suitcase at my feet, a cold beer sweating in my hand. Mike had known me since college, long before I'd met her. He didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer, but he read the truth in the way I sat, straighter, lighter, like a man who'd just put down a heavy box he'd been carrying too far. "You look relieved," he said finally. "I think I am," I admitted. "She's been telling me for years, in 100 small ways, that I'm not enough. I just never listened this clearly before." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, the kind you only get with people who've seen you at your worst. When I finally headed to bed in his spare room, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't worried about what she was thinking, doing, or planning. The ties I thought were holding me together had really been holding me down. And now they were gone. I woke to sunlight leaking through the blinds in Mike's guest room, the kind of slow, unhurried light that didn't care what time it was. For the first time in a long while, I'd slept without dreaming about her. Mike was already in the kitchen, scrambling eggs like it was a normal Tuesday, because for him it was. For me, it was the first morning in years I didn't have to measure my words, my tone, or the space I took up. "You're up," he said. "Coffee's on the left. I didn't know how you take it anymore, so I just left the milk out." The casualness of it hit harder than I expected. When you've been living under a constant low-grade criticism, even small kindnesses feel sharp. We ate in easy silence. I told him I'd be heading out later to take care of a few things. He didn't press. By 10, I was back in my car, the suitcase still in the trunk. I wasn't going to the office. I'd already sent a message to my assistant, telling her to cancel my meetings for the week. Instead, I drove toward the edge of town, toward the storage unit I'd been renting quietly for over a year. Inside were pieces of myself I'd put away, boxes of books she didn't like, cluttering the shelves, my guitar, framed photographs from before our marriage, and a worn leather jacket I hadn't worn since she'd called it trying too hard. I loaded them into the car slowly, taking my time with each one, feeling the weight of them in my hands. By the time I shut the trunk, I knew what my next stop was, the house. Not to talk, not to negotiate. Just to see it one last time on my terms. When I pulled into the driveway, her car wasn't there. I let myself in with my key, the smell of her perfume still faint in the air. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it, the bracelet box gone from the table, the counters wiped clean. I walked through each room like I was taking inventory, not of the things, but of the space itself. The life we'd built here wasn't really ours anymore. It had been shifting for years, slowly bending around her moods, her wants, her discontent. In the bedroom, the closet door was open. The empty hangers where my clothes had been looked almost symbolic, space reclaimed for someone else. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet settle, before locking the door behind me and leaving the key on the counter. Back at Mike's, I felt different. Not freer, not yet, but clearer. That night, my phone lit up with her name. I didn't answer. She called again, then a text. "We need to talk. I think I made a mistake." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to know what she'd say next, what excuses or promises she'd try. Another part, the part that had been quietly growing these past few days, didn't care. I set the phone face down and left it there. It hit me then, the marriage had been over long before she said the words. What ended in the kitchen was just the formal announcement. The real ending was the moment I stopped believing her opinion of me was the truth. And that was the first thing I wasn't going to give back. 2 days passed before I saw her again. I was sitting in Mike's living room, laptop open, trying to untangle the mess of bills and joint accounts, when there was a knock at the door. Mike was at work. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, she was standing there, Hair done, makeup perfect, dressed in the kind of soft sweater she used to wear when she wanted to look approachable. She held a paper coffee cup in one hand, like this was some casual reunion. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside but didn't move out of her way. "You made your choice." Her eyes flicked over my shoulder into the apartment. I need you to hear me out. Things with—" She stopped, searching for a word. "With him aren't what I thought. I rushed things. Maybe we can. I don't know. Figure us out again." It wasn't the apology I used to imagine. No tears, no sudden self-awareness. Just a careful pitch, as if I were a client she wanted to keep on the hook. I crossed my arms. "Do you remember how you looked at me when you called me boring?" She flinched, just slightly. "I didn't mean—" "You did, and it's fine. You were honest. I'm just returning the favor." Her jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're throwing away years?" I almost laughed. "You threw them away a long time ago. I'm just not sifting through the trash for them." The coffee cup sagged a little in her hand. "We could start fresh," she said, voice softening. "We have history." I shook my head. History isn't a reason to go back. It's a reason to know better. She looked at me for a long time, the silence between us stretching. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the quick tally of her options, the way she weighed whether pushing harder would get her what she wanted. Finally, she set the coffee cup on the step. "You'll regret this," she said. "Maybe," I replied, "but it won't be for losing you." She left without another word, her footsteps sharp against the concrete. I stood there until her car disappeared down the street, the scent of her perfume lingering faintly in the air before it, too, faded. Inside, I sat back at the laptop. The bank accounts were still open, still tangled. That was going to change. So was everything else that tied me to her. For the rest of the afternoon, I made calls, to the bank, to the credit card companies, to the realtor I'd been speaking with about my new place. Every cut of a connection felt cleaner than the last. That night, Mike asked how it went. "She wanted to come back," I said. "And?" I told her no. He grinned. "About damn time." It wasn't just about ending things anymore. It was about making sure there was no door for her to walk back through. And tomorrow, I was going to start closing them all. 2 days later, she showed up in person. It was late afternoon, and I was at Mike's kitchen table with my laptop, sorting through joint bills and untangling the mess of accounts we still shared. The knock at the door was sharp, deliberate. When I opened it, she was there, hair flawless, makeup precise, wearing that soft grey sweater she used to call her Sunday peace outfit. In her hand was a paper coffee cup, as if this were just some casual drop-by between errands. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't step back. "You made your choice." Her eyes slid past me, scanning the apartment like she was taking inventory. I need you to hear me out. Things with him aren't. They're not what I thought. I might have rushed things. Maybe we can." She hesitated, fishing for the right words. "Maybe we can figure us out again." It was the same tone she'd use when she wanted me to agree to something she'd already decided on. No apology, no ownership. Just a pitch. "Do you remember what you said to me in the kitchen?" I asked. Her brow creased. "I said a lot of things. You called me boring, predictable, safe. I didn't mean—" "You did," I said, cutting her off, "and that's fine. But you don't get to pull those words back just because the other option didn't work out." Her jaw shifted. "So you're just going to throw away all those years?" I almost laughed. "You threw them away. I'm just done pretending to dig them out of the trash." The coffee cup in her hand tilted slightly, the lid rattling. "We could start fresh," she said quietly. "We have history." "History," I said, "isn't a reason to go back. It's the reason to know better." Her gaze hardened, the softness gone. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but it won't be for losing you." She stared at me a second longer, then stepped back, setting the coffee cup down on the porch rail like it was some kind of parting gift. Her footsteps on the concrete were clipped and fast. I stayed at the door until I saw her car turn the corner. Inside, the air felt lighter. I went straight back to the laptop, opening the list I'd been working on: close joint credit cards, transfer utilities out of my name, pull my half from the savings account. One by one, I started making calls. Every confirmation email that landed in my inbox felt like another door shutting. By the time Mike got home, the list was half done. She came by, I told him. And? He asked. I told her no. His grin was instant. Good. It wasn't just about turning her away anymore. It was about making sure there was nothing left for her to walk back to. No thread she could tug on, no open door to step through. Tomorrow I'd start clearing the rest of the ties, and this time I wouldn't stop halfway. The next morning I was up before sunrise. The list from yesterday sat on the counter, and I started working through it like it was a set of marching orders. First call, the locksmith. He arrived just after 8, toolbox in hand, and within 30 minutes, the locks on every door of the house were replaced. The click of the new deadbolt felt like a statement. Next, I drove over to the house, the one she'd walked away from without realizing what else she was leaving. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I unlocked the front door with the new key and went straight to the bedroom. Her clothes still hung neatly in the closet, organized the way she liked, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the fabric. One by one, I took them down, folding each piece into cardboard boxes I'd brought. Shoes, handbags, jewelry trays from the dresser, all of it went in. I worked methodically, without pausing to linger over anything. There was no nostalgia here, only the quiet efficiency of clearing space. By noon, the living room was lined with taped, labeled boxes. I called a storage facility and arranged a unit in her name. By 3, a van had hauled every last thing out of the house and into that locked space. I sent her a text with the address and the code. Your things are here. You have 30 days. Then I called my lawyer. We met in his office downtown. Tall ceilings, shelves lined with case law. I laid out the situation without embellishment. I want every legal tie severed. House, accounts, insurance, all of it. She made her choice, and I'm not leaving loose ends. He nodded, sliding a yellow legal pad across the desk. We can start paperwork today. It'll take time, but we'll move fast. When I left his office, the sun was dipping low, streaking the buildings with gold. I felt the kind of tired that wasn't physical, the kind that comes from finally doing what you should have done long ago. Back at Mike's, I poured a drink and sat on the balcony. The street below was alive with people heading home from work, cars humming past. For the first time, I realized I wasn't watching for her car, wasn't waiting for the sound of her voice, wasn't bracing for whatever mood she'd walk in with. Mike stepped outside, handing me another beer. Productive day? Locks changed, stuff gone, lawyer hired, I said. He raised his bottle in a small salute. That's how you do it. We drank in comfortable silence, the city sounds folding into the background. I didn't know exactly what the next weeks would look like, but for the first time, they'd be mine to decide. And that was worth more than anything I'd just boxed up and sent away. The following week, I moved into the house. It was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the heavy silence of tension, but the kind that left room to breathe. I opened windows in every room, letting fresh air push out the stale perfume that had lingered too long. The first night, I slept without the hum of a phone lighting up the dark with late texts, without the creak of someone pacing in another room, just the steady chorus of crickets outside and the occasional car passing down the road. By morning, I had a plan. If I was going to rebuild, I wanted it on my terms. That meant not just removing her from my life, but reclaiming the parts of myself I'd let fade. I started with the people I'd quietly let drift away. Lunch with an old co-worker who'd left the company years ago. A beer with my cousin at a local bar we used to haunt before either of us got married. I didn't talk about her unless someone asked. When they did, I kept it short. She left. I'm fine. Afternoons were for the house. I turned the spare bedroom into a music room, pulling my guitar from the storage unit and setting it on a stand by the window. I hung the framed photographs she'd once called outdated in the hallway, snapshots from road trips, old friends, my parents in their 20s. On weekends, I drove out to the edge of the county to the small cabin I'd bought 2 years ago as an investment, but never told her about. It was barely furnished, just a bed, a table, and a wood stove, but the land stretched quiet and green in every direction. I spent whole afternoons there, walking the trails, learning which birds nested where, splitting logs for the stove until my arms ached. I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't lonely. I missed pieces of the life I'd had, sure, the routines, the sense of partnership, but not her. Not the way she made everything feel like an audition I was failing. One night, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, looking out over the field. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke from a neighbor's fire. I realized I hadn't thought about her all day. The absence wasn't forced, it had just happened. Back in town, I stopped at a small bookstore I hadn't visited in years. The owner, a woman with silver hair and a sharp memory, greeted me like no time had passed. I left with a stack of novels and a handwritten list of upcoming community events. Little by little, the edges of my life began to fill in. The spaces she'd occupied weren't empty anymore. They were being repainted, rearranged, made into something entirely mine. One afternoon, as I was unpacking the last of my boxes, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hope you're doing well. I'd like to see the house one more time." I deleted it without responding. The house didn't belong to us anymore. It never would again. It was mine now, not just in deed, but in every corner, every wall, every inch of air I could finally breathe. By the end of summer, the house felt like it had always been mine alone. The walls that once held her framed prints now carried maps from my travels and photos of places I still wanted to see. The kitchen counters weren't cluttered with things I didn't use. Every room fit me. No apologies, no compromises. Work had shifted too. I'd left the corporate job I'd taken to keep the peace and started building my own small business, consulting, freelance projects, anything that let me set my own terms. The first few clients came from old contacts, then word of mouth. Money stopped being a worry. One evening, Mike sent me a link to a photo. She was in it, standing outside a restaurant with the man she'd left me for. Only this time, she wasn't smiling. Her arms were crossed, her face turned away from him, his hand mid-gesture like he was explaining himself. I stared at it for a moment, expecting some sharp satisfaction. It didn't come. Just a quiet recognition. Her life was hers to live now, same as mine. That weekend, I stood in the cabin's doorway, looking out at the stretch of land beyond. No noise, no weight, just air and space and time to use however I wanted. I'd thought freedom would feel like breaking away. It turned out it felt like standing still and realizing I was exactly where I needed to be. The invitation came in an email with the subject line, "Keynote Opportunity." A business conference in the city wanted me to speak, not about loss, but about rebuilding. They'd heard how I'd walked away from a life that no longer fit and built one that did. On stage, under the soft lights, I told the truth. Not the tabloid version, not the bitter version, the real one. How sometimes you don't fight to keep what's breaking. How starting over isn't about erasing the past, but about carrying forward only what still matters. When I finished, the applause was steady, warm. People came up afterward, some with questions, some just to say they understood. That night, back at the cabin, I stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the stars sharp above the tree line. I thought of her once, distantly, like a name from an old yearbook. No heat, no weight. Just a fact that used to be true. The rest of my life stretched out in front of me, quiet and wide. I leaned against the railing, breathing it in. It was mine now. All of it.